So welcome back. Good to have everyone here. On the call, we've got Mark Dolan, who's the chair of the WPV-CERT group, myself, who's acting as course coordinator, and Chip Swan is with us as well. Vicky is actually engaged in helping her daughter with her brand new dog. So so in January, we'll require pictures of the new dog. So here we are in the 5th week of the class. So at this point, many of you have gotten through the first 4 or 5 units of the course online. Of course, anyone who has not, there's plenty of time to, and you will have a gap until January 11th when we'll start up again. So today we're going to go over a little bit in terms of have an opportunity to discuss some of the psychology of disasters and also get into some of the nuts and bolts in terms of fire safety and utility controls. We did have a very successful training webinar last Saturday having to do with radio communications. And that's something that I encourage everyone to go back if you were not on the call, to go and look at it online. We'll post in the chat menu the link to the recording. Or actually, Chip, is that up yet?
The link to the recording is up. The slides are not yet, but they should be there this evening.
So it's for the radio class?
Oh, I'm sorry. No, the radio class is not there yet.
Okay, okay. So when it becomes available, we will send that out and it will be posted online as well. So before we get into disaster psychology, I would like to have everyone go ahead and pull up the manual and actually go to chapter 5, because we will be using some of the resources that are within that manual. And really, with disaster psychology, one of the core things to be aware of is that people, when they are stressed, one of the best things that we can do is to just be present. And one of the ways that we can be present is by taking care of ourselves and our team. So all of these ideas are very much integrated within each other. And in terms of how do people respond when there is a disaster, I think probably all of us have experienced at one time or another what are referred to as the 5 Fs. In terms of the I'm out of here, I'm going to flee, the freezing, the let's stop and pay attention, the urge to fight back, and then fright, which I kind of think of as the extreme freezing, when there's when you really shut down. And then the complete form of shutting down is when you actually faint. And it really is a surprising thing when you see someone who is literally brought to their knees by stress. Actually, why don't I just go ahead and open it up for conversation at this point? And in terms of people's experiences or questions that they may have in terms of how people respond to disaster situations. Feel free to use either the written chat or the audio chat.
I had one thing, Cam. What was interesting to me was I do a lot of work in learning about how women are different than men. And a lot of the original psychological evaluations of the fight or flight sort of things, which, these kind of are the more expanded ones, were reactions more from men. And actually women often had a couple of other different reactions. And the one that was sort of most common was immediately to want to talk about what it was. So immediately to connect with somebody and like, let's talk this through more,
Right.
you know, which was sort of interesting to me, you know, and just, but even in a situation where it's really dangerous, you know, a woman's reaction was, what was that? And what do you think? And isn't that interesting? And gee, well, you know, and you just want to like, shut up, let's leave. Anyway.
That's really interesting. I mean, because there is definitely that variety. I hadn't heard of it along gender lines, but I definitely have experienced people who are get into hyper analysis and the, okay, I want to wrap my head around that and are doing verbalizing. And something that's really interesting that when we talk a little bit more of how do we support people is that idea of when you're listening and you're really listening and not trying to problem solve. And there's actually a exercise that I do with some folks, which is you get, and this is a fascinating experience. You pair people off. It's called sharing a loss. And you have one person sharing something that is a emotive, challenging situation. And then the person who's listening has the rule that they cannot speak. They can't say anything. They can they can nod, and they can affirm. And we do this for a few minutes. And one of the most common reactions to this activity is how incredibly hard it is not the desire to say, to reflect back. Now, and by the way, I should say, this isn't saying that that is how you should respond to folks. But imagine the situation, our desire to insert in and to say something, and that we're spending so much time and effort formulating our response that it can get in the way of our listening. And so when you've got someone who's got that hyper verbalizing, that idea of giving them space to verbalize, assuming it's a safe environment, of course, but that listening without problem solving immediately is very hard to do. But when we get into the how do you be an empathetic listener, that's a part of it. Anyone else have some immediate thoughts or experiences that they want to share about how people respond to disasters?
Yeah, I do. I used to do volunteer ambulance work, and I noticed that one thing that wasn't addressed was the adrenaline response that you get with just amazing strength and stamina that you wouldn't ordinarily have, which really comes in handy.
Yeah. Yeah. Adrenaline is both a friend and can get in our way. One of the ways I like to think about it is that when we're activated, when we're stressed out, the blood is leaving our frontal cortex. It's draining away so that the parts of our brain that do critical thinking aren't quite as well fed as the parts that are doing the running and the lifting and the more base responses. And like we've said before, in terms of scene safety, that's one of the reasons why as responders, we need to be chill. We need to take a deep breath. I'm not having an emergency. You might be having an emergency, but I'm not having an emergency. And that's not callousness, but that's keeping the blood flow in our frontal cortex so that we can make good decisions, so we can be thoughtful, and so we can protect ourselves and protecting others.
But how do you switch from the sympathetic to the parasympathetic nervous system?
There is actually there is evidence, strong evidence to suggest that deliberate deep breathing physiologically does that switch. And that by taking a deep breath in, holding it, deep breath out, it's not frou-frou ethereal It's actually physiology.
Physiological.
It is physiologically, you are keeping that, you are moving to that parasympathetic response. For those of you who are not familiar, sympathetic response is that adrenaline, let's go, let's go, let's go. It's that speed up. Parasympathetic is that relax and calm down.
The rest and digest.
It's the rest and digest. And honestly, us keeping ourselves calm, it's not just good for good decision making, but it's also contagious. If we're calm, we help others be calm. So I may have shared this analogy with you guys before, but I like to think about in a disaster situation, in a tense situation, we all become like the little kid who's running down the street and falls down and scrapes our knee. We don't know how hurt we are. So we look to the adult. We look to the person there and like, let them tell me. And if that adult freaks out, then you're going to freak out because you've just been told that you're not safe. If that person that you're looking to, and like if you're your first responder, oftentimes you're that person is looking to, and that person is calm. Now, it doesn't mean that you're in denial about the situation. I mean, you can be serious, but if you're calm and it's like, and that helps everyone else be calm, you're letting them know. And by doing that, you're helping them have a better reaction. It's not negating the seriousness of the situation. It's not negating their level of anxiety, but you're giving them the gift of keeping that blood in that frontal cortex.
Just want to add a couple of observations. I've been in the role of safety officer in some organizations and kind of learned how to deal with extremely tense situations, not like terrorist situations, but like someone got hurt or frightened or what have you. And there's a couple of things that people will do that tend to lock you into a high anxiety frame of mind. One is to just start talking. And if you notice that someone is talking, I found one of the things that helps them relax and get themselves centered mentally again is to just calmly repeat back to them the things that they're saying, paraphrase it, to say, oh, I hear you saying this, because they want to know that someone hears it. Yes, I hear you. And I hear that you said this, and we're gonna take care of it. What else is on your mind? And just knowing that someone hears it and they're not just freaking out in their own head, that their blather is being heard and calmly dealt with, can help people a great deal to calm down. And the other thing that I found that people do a lot is they'll hunch over and they'll get into a physically protective stance, ready to run away or guard themselves against something. And once the threat is passed, if you can just get your shoulders relaxed, stand up, loosen your neck a little bit, clench your hands and relax them a little bit, and just get that tension, the physical tension out of your hands and your feet, your arms and legs, and go a long way to getting the mind calm.
Mm-hmm.
The body, once the mind gets the body tense, the body keeps the mind tense.
Absolutely. And in fact, actually, kind of going back to on a physical level, if you're experiencing someone who's hyperventilating, one of the best strategies is to have them breathe along with you. If you just say the words, take a deep breath, they can't hear you really. But if you say, follow my breathing, and you do a deep breath, and you have them, you give them something to focus on, and you get them to take deep breaths with you, that then helps break that cycle of that physical stress and can get, again, it's getting the blood flow back into the frontal cortex and it's breaking that anxiety state. Absolutely. There's a profound connection between the physical and the emotional and the mental. Another component of that is addressing primary needs. There is a profound benefit of having a blanket. Having a blanket wrapped around someone, both from a warmth perspective, but I have used that extensively as also being a surrogate hug. It provides the deep pressure, and it's a way that someone can give themselves deep pressure. And I actually find it a very useful technique, because when there is value in physical contact done mindfully and done appropriately, but there are also, people have different touch tolerances. And so that I find that giving someone a blanket and letting them hug themselves gives them a lot of power, but also gives them, is a form of that deep touch, which is physiologically very relaxing.
Yeah.
What are some other experiences or reactions that people have experienced? Carol on the chat talks about forgetting words. Absolutely. One of the things that happens when we're stressed out is that we do not have a great connection to the language centers. And so I want actually to remind us all that when you ask someone a question and they're stressed, have a lot of wait time. Be willing to ask them a question and give them time to hear what you're saying and to find the words. If we were in a normal situation, you might say, oh, well, maybe I didn't say that right, and ask another question. But something that can happen is that you ask someone a question and their gears are slowly putting together an answer. And then you ask them another question and they're like, and then their gears start whirring again. And so you get kind of stuck. Be willing to ask a question and then wait longer than is comfortable for you. And that's okay. That may be totally appropriate for the conversation that you're having. So the next component of this is apply oxygen to self before applying it to others. And as responders, I mentioned the power of taking deep breaths, but there's also kind of on a longer time frame, doing what we can to get enough sleep, to get a chance to get some of our nerves out with exercise, trying to eat right, even when it's a disaster. I mean, these sound like they sound almost simplistic, but it's hard to remember, which is why we put it in the training. This really helps us be helpful for others. And for the component of sleep, there's a lot of research that suggests that the concept of a safety nap is incredibly powerful. Research has been done with fields that are chronically without enough sleep. This includes physicians, and that even short naps, like a 15-minute nap, they might not feel a lot better, but statistically, their ability to perform is much, much higher. People who work on helicopters literally call these safety naps. A friend of mine who's actually a care flight nurse has also taught it to her toddler as now we're going to take a safety nap. This is something that, because as helpers, and sometimes it's hard for us to take care of ourselves, we also need to reinforce this with our teams. And so we need to model the behavior, and we have to encourage others to engage in that behavior. And of course, this is true before disaster, but also during a disaster situation. For those of you who've had experience in stressful environments, are there other things that you do specifically to take care of yourself?
Stay hydrated is a big thing.
Oh, yes.
I've noticed that, boy, that just makes you feel bad physically and emotionally, and just a mouthful of water can calm you down so fast.
Mm-hmm.
Especially since if you're feeling anxious, you're starting to pant, your mouth is dry, all these things that are going on, and just a mouthful of water can short circuit so much of that.
Fantastic point. What are some things that the rest of you guys have been doing? Someone wrote in the chat, writing in a journal when possible. Absolutely. Giving yourself a chance to do that reflection, very powerful.
Making wisecracks and singing, preferably Broadway musical songs, but I mean, I'm open to other things.
Jazz hands.
Yep. And actually singing is also very good in terms of a deep breath perspective. One of the tools that I actually take with me on deployment, give me 2 seconds and I'll grab it.
Oh, just a spoonful of sugar helps some medicine go down.
Actually, a spongy bowl.
Yeah.
I will take a moment, step aside, and just get a game of catch going. There's certain simplicity to that, and giving people a chance, and it is also a way of connecting. Also is really good for rolling on your back as well.
Good field pillow.
Exactly. I'd love to hear what other people do to take care of themselves in stressful situations.
Yeah, the East Coast version of that was hacky sacks. Hacky sack around. Much more
hacky
portable.
sack. I can't do it very well, but then it becomes a source of amusement for others.
Play, just any form of play. Anything that's not thinking about the stressors, anything that makes you realize that the whole world is not about whatever is threatening you at the moment, can help you get it under control.
Selena in chat mentioned petting my cat. We oftentimes don't have a cat on deployment, but there's actually a lot of value we will have therapy dogs. And I have seen people who are having a hard time with the emotionality, and there can be a very positive reaction to the therapy dogs, and they are a profoundly useful resource that can be brought to bear.
Yeah, I'd be crazy if I didn't have a dog.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I'm crazy even though I have a dog.
Us too, for both.
Yep.
My dog thinks I'm okay though.
Well, I'm pretty biased in the pro dog group. Now I have to respect that for many people, there are some very real, be mindful that they can be a source of anxiety. So always be aware of the situation before introducing therapy dogs, but they often can be very powerful.
Oh, yeah.
Chris Swan talks about stretching. That goes back to that whole physicality. Can be deep breaths, stretching, physical play, just taking a short break can be incredibly useful. So at this point, I would like everyone, if you haven't done so already, go ahead and open up the CERT manual and go ahead and go to the Unit 5 chapter. I will put a link to it yet again in the chat so that if you don't have it immediately available, you can download a copy. And I want to point this out for a few reasons. One is that there is a real wealth of information that's in the manual above and beyond what's actually in the course, and that we all approach information in different ways and at different paces. So really do take the time to go through the manual in addition to the class. There's real value in both. And within that, you'll see that on page, you'll see the page numbers are done as unit number dash page number. So in this case, it's page 5-5 and 5-6. And you'll see that there's what's called the SelfCare toolkit. And so I wanted to point this out as a resource and as a tool. Someone had talked about journaling. And there's real value in this idea of kind of a guided journaling and a reflecting on where we are on a number of different levels, and then doing some thinking in terms of what are some practical things that we can do to address those. Is anyone having any trouble accessing that material? The other reason why accessing the participant manual is really powerful is also if you do find yourself struggling with the details of one of the quizzes, is going to the exact verbiage in the manual oftentimes will address some of those just logistical challenges. Also, when we go to looking forward at the skills testing and the skills activities that we're going to be doing, you'll notice that it'll say the words PM number dash number. And so just letting you know that they're referring back to this participant manual. And so that gives you a chance to look, just kind of connect the dots between those two. So we talked a little bit about specific strategies, and there is a wealth of material out there, and there are many different frameworks. One of them that has been getting a lot of support and a lot of evidence-based is the whole idea of psychological first aid. And I really want you to think of that in terms of just like first aid isn't replacing a doctor's office and isn't replacing urgent care, isn't replacing the can get further help. It's not about being the end all be all. You're not becoming someone's long-term counselor, but you are doing immediate stabilization and a emotional triage as well. And so one nice framework for thinking about this is that idea of listening, protecting, and connecting. If this is a topic of particular interest to you, I strongly encourage you to take it's a free online course that was put together by Johns Hopkins University. It's available through Coursera. Let's see, I've got the link there. Oops, let me go back. The link there, and I will grab that and put that link in the chat session as well. Yeah. And actually, I want to go back, and two really good points were brought up in chat. Another self-care thing to do is to make sure that you stay on your regular medications. And that is actually not insignificant. When our schedules, when our habits, when our patterns are broken, we don't have a typical day, it's very, very easy for people to not take their medications in a timely manner. And that can be very disruptive, both on a physical level, but also on a mental and emotional level. So thank you very much for bringing that up, Sheila. And Greg asks the question of what if there's a language barrier? And that's a really good question. There are tools that we can use for communicating in terms of there are applications that can be downloaded ahead of time on your phone that do specific conversation sets. This is a little bit more for medical response than it is for mental health. But I want you to all be aware of, there's one called Metababble. Let's see, called Metababble, highly recommended. And what that does is that has a list of preset questions, and you can download a number, let's see, give it a second. You can actually download ahead of time in a number of languages. And the thing that's insanely clever about this program is that it asks questions that can have yes, and it'll say it out loud in the appropriate language. but it asks them as closed questions. And so the person can respond with yes or no. And so even if you don't have language in common, it's a very useful tool for communication. So one of the things that we can do about language barrier is to have tools like this. Another tool is actually basically I can't draw to save my life. And so I actually have it's a language sheet. And so it is a drawing of standard things so that you can point to. And there's a lot that with that you can connect to. Now, all that aside, so those are very useful. Having tools ahead of time to help support communication. But a lot of communication also can be done in terms of primary needs, in terms of facial expression. As I said, touch, therapeutic touch can be very, very powerful. Now it has to be taken mindfully, so because you don't want to invade someone's space, but reaching out and putting a hand on a shoulder, that human connection can be incredibly powerful. And also just being present, even if you don't have language in common. And if you think about the way that many of us have talked about our very positive relationships with dogs, that a lot of that is that being a mammal and being present, that alone has therapeutic value. I'm looking at the chat. That specific app that I have is called Metababble. It's available for free, I believe, on both on Apple iPhones and on Android. There are others as well. And I don't have a link to a specific picture board. I'll have to do a little bit of digging around to find out. I mean, literally, it's a laminated sheet that folds up that has pictures that are icons that are relatively universal, and that can be useful for communication. Are there any other questions or thoughts or comments or observations about psychological first aid before we switch over to fire suppression?
I'd just like to point out that everybody is susceptible to psychological damage. And watch out for things that you think are just fine and you think you've dealt with. But later on, you find you're getting just kind of weird feelings about things, or something will remind you of the incident and it makes you feel anxious or something like that. I'll share with you that when the George Floyd incident happened, and I watched this man saying, "I can't breathe," suddenly I started having anxiety attacks when I was trying to go to bed, and I sleep with a CPAP machine on. And I could not figure out why. It's a wonderful thing to have this mask on because I can breathe and I'm not waking up constantly as I start snoring and so forth. I couldn't figure out why that was triggering something. So I called my doctor, got a recommendation to a therapist, and started talking with someone. And we worked out that when I was 13, I had a scuba diving experience where I had a bad tank of air and I was poisoned slightly, ran out of air at about 90 feet. Everything was okay. On my way up, I knew what to do. It's still a little bit traumatic when you run out of air at 90 feet below water. Still, everything's under control. And on my way up, suddenly I encountered a ceiling of jellyfish and had to make a decision about whether or not I wanted to drown or get stung by jellyfish. So by the time I got back onto the boat, I was sick from poisoned air. I was stung all over my body with jellyfish. I was just having a really bad day. But I thought I had processed it all and it was a good experience overall. But it turns out that that's what I was flashing back on. Yeah. That the memories in the back of my mind were of the jellyfish and so forth. And when I realized that my memories of that day, of that experience coming up, were black and white stills, that I hadn't processed it, that it was still, it was basically PTSD, and I had not processed it. And by the time we got done talking through it and facing it and figuring out why it was so traumatic to me at the time, now I can think about that day and it's in full color, and I can see the beautiful blue waves, and the jellyfish were actually beautiful, really painful little stingers. But it was actually a very wonderful experience, and I did all the right things and I survived it just fine. But over the course of about a half an hour, I experienced a lot of traumatic stress, and didn't process it right at the time, and just kind of swallowed it. And 48 years later, it was still bothering me and making me sick, making me physically sick. And just don't let that happen to you, and don't think that you're immune to it. No matter how much
And I think that it's also a really good point that sometimes we'll be surprised by it, and that's okay too. Sometimes we will know what our triggers are, but sometimes we won't. And that having that response is totally normal. And part of self-care is after the fact as well as during and before.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a great example of that.
Well, and I had told that story to people many, many times, and it was a heroic, epic adventure and so forth. And I was all proud of it and so forth, never realizing that deep down inside, it had still scared me. And I'd never dealt with how bad it had scared me that day.
Yep.
Now I feel great about it. So, and I sleep well again too. I put that mask on, no problem.
Oh, Cam, I just wanted to mention, it was a great story, Chip. I wanted to mention that I remember when I took CERT the first time, and the firefighter was telling us that there was a small child he had saved, and he got really upset for weeks, if not months, because he was flashing to what if it was my child.
Yep. Kids are one that we often can be, from a responder perspective, a lot more challenging. And that's a really good point. It's something that it's good for us to know kind of what our triggers are and to be aware of that. And it's also to be okay kind of figuring those out after the fact as well.
Right. And one thing, sorry if I'm interrupting, but it would be good to see if anything is bothering you. Don't beat yourself up. Don't have a prejudice against seeing a psychologist if you need to.
No, go for it, because nobody knows everything that's going on in their own head. If you knew everything that was happening in your own head, they wouldn't call it the unconscious.
Absolutely.
No, can I add something else, Karen?
Please do.
So I have this great friend named David who is a river rafter, a river raft guide. And like he does all different kinds, where he's one on a big boat that's got 12 people on it, or he's the one person rowing with 2 big oars, or, all different kinds of things. And he's dealt with lots of, catastrophic situations of one kind or another in many places all over the world. And some advice that he gave me was to remember that at some point in time, it doesn't matter how much planning you do, how much you're organized, how much you've thought through every situation, pandemonium will rule. I mean, all of a sudden there will be 2 people tossed out of the boat this direction, you're going upside down, just at some point in time, pandemonium will rule. And he said for himself, just knowing that gives him this one-upsmanship sort of on chaos, because it's sort of like you've already believed that this will happen. And so instead of, resisting the reality or saying, oh my God, whatever, you're just like, oh, now we're in the phase where pandemonium wins, you know,
I like it.
and it just keeps you in this really mellow space of, oh, this is interesting. All right, I wonder what happens next. Let's start gathering data, figuring out what do we do now. You know, it was, but I've loved that, and that being, you know, recognizing that that's something that'll happen seems very helpful to me.
I really like that. And because the way I like to say it is that denial is not just a river in Egypt.
No.
And it is not unusual for people to really fail to be aware of the situation because it is outside of their mental metaphor of what is possible. When we do drills, we have the makeup on it. We'll have people screaming. It's a concept called stress inoculation. And it's that idea of, so that when we see it in real life, it's not as stressful because we've seen it and we've survived it. And so it gives us the opportunity to build that. And that sounds like your friend has the same kind of mindset of okay, it's chaotic, but that is not the end of the world. We are developing the skills so that we can handle these uncomfortable situations. Mm-hmm. And that's what puts us in a much better mind frame for making good decisions, for maintaining situational awareness. Right. One of the reasons why I personally love emergency room doctors is that they've got great perspective. It's like they're always, you're screaming. You've got a great airway.
You're breathing just great.
And it's true. It's the ones who are quiet that scare us. And partly it's the dark humor that comes with the experience, but it is that perspective. It's like I don't surf, but I admire people who do. And it's that mindset of, you're not stopping the wave, you're working with it.
Yeah.
And we're not stopping the disasters from happening, but we're developing the skills so that we can stay above water.
Two comments. It's an old saying in military schools that no battle plan ever survives meeting the enemy. Yeah. And Mike Tyson, God, I love Mike Tyson. He put it great. He said, everybody's got a plan until they get hit in the face.
It's so true. I mean, obviously, we're taking this class. We believe in preparedness. We are building up our toolbox. We also have to have a certain level of accepting there are things outside of our control. We have skills. We're going to deal with. We're going to mitigate it as best we can in terms of preventing issues from happening. But we're also going to respond as best we can, and we're also going to be kind to ourselves and kind to others when it's difficult. And so that's part of that self-care. I see in the chat that there is a question about anything that's kids specific. And there are a few strategies just to kind of keep in mind. And actually, these are human specific. Kids, I think, are just like cartoon versions of adults. And so it's just take the same things and just make them a little bit more exaggerated. But those things, I'm seeing a puppy, is that getting to eye level. So that literally, I mean, since we tend to be taller than kids, getting down to eye level and not towering over them can be very helpful. If they have a caregiver with them who is calm, letting that caregiver hold them and have an interaction with them, that can be very helpful. There's a little bit of a balancing act though, because if you've got a caregiver who is freaking out, sometimes that can make the situation worse. And so there's a little bit of a balancing act to be had. For those of you who have more experience than I do with kids, are there other strategies that you would add?
I would say asking them questions about themselves in a calm voice. So what's your name again? Oh, and how old are you? Oh, so what grade does that mean you're in? Oh, do you like your teacher? Oh, you know, I mean, that kind of stuff just boom brings all the craziness down really quick. I mean, you got to make sure that they're not hurt, right?
Yeah.
You know, that's the important thing. And sometimes they're so upset they don't even realize that they're hurt, right?
Right.
You know,
Yeah,
depending if they're really little, they can't even say that they're hurt sometimes. But
exactly.
ooh, play make believe. What a good idea.
Yeah, yeah. And it's funny, you talked about people, trauma doctors. Um, I had a friend I have a friend who's a trauma surgeon. And when he started practicing surgery, he went out to the Midwest and worked in the ER in the Midwest. And I said, why is that? He says, well, everybody thinks that you get the most bizarre stabbings and shootings and so forth in the inner city. He says, no, you haven't seen weird accidents until you've seen somebody who's been halfway through a thresher. But work out in the farm belt and you get used to, oh my God, what do I do about this? And he said, after about 6 months of that, you're not freaked out by much of anything. So yeah, inoculating yourself to that kind of a thing, which by the way, is why in the Army, that's why they invented the M80, those big bang firecrackers that are so loud that you're not allowed to buy anywhere in the US now, but you can still get in Mexico. Those were designed by the US Army to be as loud as a grenade. So they could set those off and people would know what it sounds like to have a grenade go off near you without having to set off a dangerous grenade near you.
I have
So-
something that isn't quite disaster psychology, but I think some of these CERT size up things are hard to remember. I had a heck of a time getting past that quiz. And I just wanted to say that I have downloaded a bunch of those things on my phone.
Yeah.
And it's, if you're blanking out, when a real disaster comes, go to the CERT size up and look at it.
Absolutely. So in fact, this is a concept that has really started to be embraced within the medical community. And when I was working in the simulation center at Stanford, we very, very clearly said, these are not cheat sheets. These are cognitive aids. Because that idea of when you are stressed, as I said, the blood is leaving your frontal cortex. Your ability to remember things goes out the window. Using externalized tools is a powerful, powerful way of extending yourself. And one of the things that if you look within emergency rooms, if you look within, if you look at an operating room, there are checklists and there are tools that are specifically as a way of externalizing information so that you're not relying on memory when your memory is impeded by stress. And so thank you, Carol, so much for bringing that up. And there are some resources out there, and I actually think that there are even more that can be contributed. Robert brings up that pilots use checklists all the time. In fact, I highly recommend, there's a book by Atul Gawande called The Checklist Manifesto, which is about the use of checklists and the transition that it's made into the medical world, and how incredibly powerful a tool it is, because it acknowledges the natural limitations that we have in terms of memory. And so absolutely no shame. Absolutely, it is a shame if we don't use those tools to support ourselves.
Yeah, and Cam, this is Mark. Just to add on to that, we do have what's called a FOG, or Field Operating Guide. And this is something everybody needs to put in their backpack, because as Cam was just saying, this is where you go for reference material. If you don't have your phone with you, or your phone battery died, all the summary of this material is in the Field Operating Guide. So this is your go-to source when you forget what triage steps you're taking and all these other factors. Just grab your FOG.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd also say rely on your team members. If you've got another trained CERT near you, don't try to remember everything yourself. Talk out loud about what you're thinking, what you're seeing, what your process is, and ask them for constant feedback too. Check each other, build on each other's ideas, and you'll miss less. And anything that helps you remember, like the decap BTLS, check. How do I remember that? Bottle caps, decap bottles. And that works for me. I can't get it out of my head. I can't come up with a better one. Any time I want to remember DCAP BTLS, it's bottle caps for me. So great, that works. Whatever works for you, use it.
Absolutely. So we are coming towards the top of the hour. I think I have absolutely no issues with the fact that we focus on Unit 5, and because this is our first time running this support meetings to go along with this hybrid course. So we will roll Unit 6 in with January 11th and January 18th. I do want to plant the seed of an idea that because this is a new version of the program, we will be sending out at the end of the class a survey about what's worked well, what we could do better. And so because this is kind of a long class, I would really encourage everyone to write down notes right now and kind of keep in mind that we'll be looking for that feedback, and just to think along those lines. We do have, I think it's, I'm not looking at a calendar at the moment. I think it's 4 weeks before we meet again. We will send out a reminder in terms of the meeting details. Definitely feel free to continue the conversation, have post questions, have exploration of how we implement this locally on the discussion list that can continue to be live during this winter break. And with that, I would, without further ado, I'd like to just go ahead and wrap up the class. People are welcome, or the official time, just out of respect for people's time, but if you would like to hang on and chat, we will stay on the line. So thank you all very much.
I don't know, this might be jumping the gun a little bit, but before we lose everyone here, I'd like to mention that our website is now able to take everybody's registration, and you can submit documents now, your certification on, if you've done the FEMA training and so forth, you can submit all of that through the My Profile page there, and it will become more intuitive and so forth, and prettier as time goes on, but it is intuitive enough and pretty enough to get the job done today. And I encourage anybody who wants to start working on that, go ahead and register on our website and go ahead and start sending in your materials.
I have a question for any division leaders out there, since I offered to test the division radios. I plan on doing it on 7 p.m. some night. And if you have a preference for day of the week, and if you want to wait till January, please email me with your votes, and I'll send out a message to schedule it. And this includes Chip and Mark and whoever else has a division radio. And hopefully everyone has my email. I'll type it here in the chat.
Yeah, Carol, are you thinking about doing that weekly or monthly, or?
What I was hoping to do is just do it 2 months in a row, and also work with Joanne, but I wasn't hoping to sign up for this on a regular basis. I don't think monthly is necessary. I think quarterly would be more than good enough.
Okay.
And I'm sure that you'll be sending that out to the division leader mailing list as well, yes?
Right, right. And Selena maybe has ideas too.
Good. Thanks for doing that.
You're welcome.
Just to follow up on Chip's comments there regarding the website, if you do have certificates of the completion of the course, the online course, or other certificates like the IS 100, 700, all those. Best thing to do right now is to just kind of hang on to them. We are going to send out in the next couple of weeks very specific instructions on how you can log into the website, upload these documents. So don't worry about it right now. You don't need to be concerned about it. Just hold on to your certificates for now, and we'll be sending out specific instructions on the next steps so that we can get all that material from you and get that on the website. Thank you so much, Chip, for getting that registration website up and running. I look forward to testing it out.
A little bit at a time, we get better.
Chip, can I ask you what is new on the website? I missed it.
So there's the registration is much more intuitive. So if you go to register, that's the little, looks like a person, their head and shoulders in the upper right hand corner. You click on that and you'll get a registration button. I'm going to add a more obvious way to get to that as well. But once you register, there's a and you're logged in, there's a My Profile thing in the menu, and in there you can update your phone number and notes about yourself, things that you want us to know about you, and you can also upload your certificates.
And we will be sending out a lot more information about that. You're kind of getting a sneak preview from Chip.
Yeah.
Sounds good. And thank you to Chip for all his hard work on the website and everything else. And Mark and everybody, and Cam for her great teaching.